You heard something about flavor runs, but you're not entirely sure what it's all about. Let me go show you what it is and how we use it to make a gin. Hey everyone, Distiller Greyling here, one of your favorite home and hobby distillers. Today I want to talk about flavor runs or individual flavor distillations and how we use them to make a gin. So as the name implies, we are going to do individual flavor distillations from the botanicals we want to use or maybe is curious about, and then in the end we're going to blend it together to make our gin. Now if you're not sure which type of gin to make, go check out this video where I explain a bit about the basic types of gins we get out there. Let's say we want to make a London dry gin. So what we're going to do, individual run of juniper, coriander, any type of root like an orris or a licorice or an angelica root, a citrus run, as well as any other botanicals that you maybe want to put your own twist on it, you can also use. With this individual flavor runs from each botanicals, we'll end up with this, a collection of flavors. And this collection of flavors we will then use to make our gin. The most important thing to remember about flavor runs or individual flavor distillations is to keep everything the same if you want to work back to a single run distillation. Why is that important? If we keep everything the same, it just helps and ease the calculations that we're going to do later for that single gin run. Now what is this single gin run I'm talking about? That's when we take all the botanicals that we want, add it into a gin bag or maybe macerate it beforehand, direct infuse or vapor infuse it to make our gin. Now if you're not entirely sure what gin technique to use, go check out this video that I talked about all the differences of gin distillation techniques and how you can make your gin. Once you have got this collection of flavors, we're going to take small amounts in certain ratios, add them together to make a new blend. It's very important to note down exactly the ratios that you use because we're going to use that later to reverse engineer back to that single gin run I'm talking about. So let's get started. First up, we'll look at our base spirit and get that ready. We're going to use 1 liter as a starting volume. We're going to water or dilute it down to between 40 and 60% ABV. Now it's advisable to always use the same starting ABV or proof and volume. This will just ease the calculations later when we want to reverse engineer. The lower starting ABV percentage you have, you tend to get more flavor out of the same botanicals. The reason for that is a higher ABV start will tend to boil faster and have lesser time for vapor botanical interactions to extract that flavors. But just remember, if you start with a 45% ABV, always try to use a 45% ABV. For each individual flavor run, you want to write down the exact weight amount of botanicals you use. You know, did you use 50 grams or 100 grams or 150 grams in your single run distillation? Now we tend to use more botanical per weight for the flavor runs as we want a bolder and stronger taste when we do our blends. But don't worry, we will calculate the exact amount of botanical weight we'll need later for that single gin distillation. I also like to crush my botanicals a bit. That just like opens them up and gives them more surface area for that infusion and extracting the flavors. Now it's your decision of how you want to distill the single run botanical. Whether you want to macerate it, direct infuse, or just straight up vapor infuse it. But as you would guess it by now, just try and do it every time the same way. Remember, when we do our single gin run, you're going to add all these different botanicals together in one bag. And you're going to do a one run distillation. So it just makes it easier if you keep everything constant in the flavor runs to do your single run at the end. When you're done distilling the single botanical as a flavor run, you are going to end up with a higher percent ABV than what you started with. I like to water it down to a strength that I'm more comfortable drinking at. If you're going commercial and you're using this during your product development phase, remember to water it down to allowable selling strength. Here in South Africa, we are allowed to sell gin at a minimum of 43% ABV, so it's better than to dilute it down to that 43 and always keep it there. When you're done distilling and you water it down, get it bottled and get it labeled and try to get as much information as you can on your label. Like what type of base spirit that you use, what was your starting strength, your starting volume, obviously the botanical that you used, and how many grams of that botanical did you use to do your distillation. And also write down the type of distillation you did, your vapor or your direct infusion, it doesn't matter. It just helps keep everything constant, and maybe you will forget in a year's time exactly how you made this one and you want to recreate it again, you got all the information on the label and you can just go and copy everything and do a run again. After doing some individual flavor distillations, you're going to start to build up this collection of flavors. And when you are ready and you know you've got enough for that specific gin you want to make, you can start to blend and make that new gin. Now this is the experimental and fun part, the blending of flavors part. Now it's your decision of how you want to make your gin. Now obviously for a gin, your juniper has to be your more dominant flavor, but it's still yours and you can make it any way you like to. You don't have to use this to make gin at all. You can make something else if you want to. But yes, for now, I'm just going to look at flavor runs and how to make a gin. Now the ratios that you use can be anything that you want. 1 milliliter or 5 milliliters or 10 milliliters. As long as you just remember, what does 1 represent? Is 1 equal to 1 milliliter or is 1 equal to 5 milliliters? Note down the ratio of each individual flavor that you use and add it together to make your blend. Remember to add everything in first, give it a small stir and then taste it. Once you've taken 1 or 2 sips out of your blend, don't attempt to add anything in it again because that will not keep the ratios constant. This is now the time we need to determine that what you've tasted, is it what you like or not. If you didn't really like it, do some small adjustments. If you use a ratio on 2 on this one specifically, maybe make it 4 or bring it down to 1 depending on how you tasted it. You can do this process and repeat it as many times as you want until you end up with that specific gin that you like and that's perfect for your taste. Now I must say, during this blending phase and adjusting the ratios, I actually learned a lot about how a single botanical tastes and smells after being distilled. And it really gives me an idea of just how does one single flavor can influence a gin, or just bumping it up more, how it can change the gin completely. And it was really fun doing it. When you've made a gin that you really like and you're comfortable with your blend and you've got your ratios written down, you've got 2 choices here. Your first option is that you can use that same ratios and upscale it to a volume that you want to make. Instead of using a ratio of 1 milliliter, 2 milliliters and 10 milliliters, take it up to 500 milliliters or 1 liter or 2 liters and use that same ratio but in a bigger volume to make that gin or that blend. Now this works perfectly, but it takes considerable longer to make your gin at the end of the day. Because remember, if you're using larger ratios, you have to do that first, all those small individual runs again on a bigger volume, and then add everything again together, stir it and let it just sit there for a while to marry together, and then you've got your gin. But I know guys that have done it and they are very successful with it. Second option is that single gin run I've been talking about. That's where we're going to take all these single botanicals, add it together inside our gin bag, do 1 distillation to make our gin. Now it's important to remember at this stage that everything had to be made the same and had to be constant. The only changing variable that's going to be is the weight amount of the botanicals that we use for our flavor runs. Now comes the second fun part, the calculations. Now I tend to use this table just to break down the starting parameters for me, the constants, the botanicals used and their ratios. Now if you look at the table, the first part is our constants and the bottom part is the botanicals that we use. The blending ratio, the percentage, the weight of the botanicals, as well as the last column, that's the percent per weight, and that's the one we're going to use to make our single run. Don't worry if it looks very confusing now, I'm going to help you and we're going to work through the whole table. So for the first part, we're going to fill in all the constants on the top part of the table. For that, let's someone use that London dry gin we've been talking about earlier. So first up, my base spirit that I used was a neutral ground spirit that was at 90% ABV. I watered it down to have a starting percent ABV of 50%. My starting volume for my base spirit is going to be 1 liter at that 50% ABV that I've watered it down. My still that I'm going to use is the 13 liter round still configured into a pot still, and the ginning technique or the infusing technique, I'm going to macerate it for 36 hours and then remove the botanicals, put it in a bag and then vapor infuse that same botanicals for my gin. At the end, I will water it down to 45% ABV. That's just a comfortable tasting strength for me. And also the ratio that I used a 1 to 1 milliliter ratio. For the bottom table, we start off with the botanicals that we used and the ratio at which we blended it. If you see that X twist, that was just that extra botanical I was talking about that you maybe want to put your own twist on that London dry gin. So we're going to add all the ratios together to end up with a blend ratio total. We will use this blend ratio total to work out the blend percentage of each botanical. So we will take the blend ratio of each individual botanical divided by the blend total that we worked out times 100 to get a percentage. So for juniper, we're going to take 10 divided by 20, that was the total, times 100, and we get 50%. So that means that our blend consisted of 50% juniper. Now you will do that with the rest of the botanicals that are left. Remember that botanical weights I told you to write down and remember. We're going to fill it in the next column. So for my juniper flavor run, I used 100 grams of juniper. So we then take this botanical weights and multiply it by the blend percentage we worked out earlier. So for juniper, it's going to be 100 grams times that 50%, and we end up with 50 grams. Then we're going to add up all these newly calculated botanical weights to get to a total weight at the bottom. From this total weight, we can now work out the percentage per weight of each botanical needed for that single run distillation. What we'll use, we'll take that newly calculated weight divided by the total weight times 100 to get a percentage. So for juniper, it's going to be that 50 grams divided by the 90 is what the total that we worked out times 100, that's going to give you a 56%. So that means for our single shot distillation, 56% by weight is going to be juniper. To put it more easier, if you take a gin bag and you fill it up with 100 grams total, it means 56% of this bag is going to be juniper. That's going to equal to 56 grams. If you use a bag that's going to be only 50 grams in total, it means you're going to end up with 28 grams of juniper. Okay, we filled in our table, we did our calculations, and we ended up with this percent per weight. But just what do we do with it? Now I see that last column that we worked out to weight as a type of 100 gram gin bag full of botanical. So instead of percentage, I see it as grams. From searching a bit on the internet, I found that the amount of botanicals that you use for 1 liter of ethanol can range anything from 20 to 35 grams. Now I tend to take that with my 100 gram gin bag and I try to make my own calculations. What I tend to do then is I multiply each botanical in the last column by a third or 0.33 to get a new weight that I can use in 1 liter of ethanol. So that means for my last column, if it's 56%, I'm going to take it as 56 grams. So that 56 grams of juniper times a third, I get to 18.5 grams. Now using these weights that we've calculated last, we can add all those weights and botanicals together in one gin bag and do one single run the same way we did our flavor runs. If we kept everything constant and we distill our single run the same as we did our flavor runs, you will end up with a product that's pretty much going to taste the same to that blend you made earlier. If it's not entirely the same, you can always now do a small bit of adjustments with the botanicals, add it into one bag again and do a run again. This makes it very easy for product development. If you want to upscale this recipe, it's also very easy. You're basically just going to take that last column that we used and multiply it by the amount of liters that you want to make. Just keep in mind that if you want to upscale, do it in small increments. Don't immediately go for 400 liters as you might not know exactly how it will react when upscaling. Now if you're wondering just how much product can you make with this 1 liter of ethanol, I've got you covered. If you're running a still that's about 95% efficient and you dilute your distillate down to about 45% ABV at the end, using 1 liter of neutral grain spirit, ethanol or vodka, starting between 40 and 60% ABV, you can more or less expect what you can see in this table. 40% starting ABV will give you around about 880 milliliters, and using a 60% ABV, you can go up to about 1.3 liters. So roughly you can say you're going to get 1 liter of product out if you dilute it down to about 45% ABV. Now this is a lot of information and theory and calculations, but I will definitely leave all of it here down in the comments below. And I think I'm definitely going to do some type of a practical run later just to demonstrate exactly how it works. But I hope this gives you a better understanding of what is flavor runs or individual flavor distillations and just how we use them to make a gin. Until I see you guys again, remember to be awesome, to be kind, and be yourself. Cheers.